Final Fantasy XIII, a game that bounces on the tightrope of either being deeply loved or heavily disliked, with a fan base divided like no other Final Fantasy game. To some, a glimmering crystal in the sky. To others, a mere broken shard in the franchise. This is my personal love letter to Final Fantasy XIII. Our story begins on Cocoon, a floating continent likened to the scale of North America by Motomu Toriyama. Cocoon, run by the Sanctum, a corrupt governing body that exiles any of its people who are suspected to be influenced by or in cohesion with the outside world. That outside world being Pulse. Compared to Cocoon, Grand Pulse is a full-size planet, likened to the size of Earth by the developers as well. To the civilians of Cocoon, Grand Pulse is painted as somewhere worse than hell itself by none other than the Sanctum. To the people of Cocoon, and even some of our main cast, being sent to Grand Pulse is a punishment worse than death. Such lies and fear-mongering tactics were spun by the Sanctum because Cocoon and Grand Pulse were once at war. This war is called the War of Transgression. This event happened 600 to 700 years prior to the current setting of Final Fantasy XIII, and is the main reason that Cocoon has a hole in its surface today. Over many centuries, these two places have grown very distant and very bitter towards each other. Sanctum basically spun to its civilians that, that's big Australia, you'll get fucking eaten there. And honestly, there's kind of some truth to that. Look at Vanille, look at Fang, and just look at the fucking size of that thing.
One of the biggest mistakes I ever made was with this big right here.
So here we are, at the start of the game, including most of our cast. Lightning, Saz, Vanille, and Hope, as well as many other civilians who are on their way to the hanging edge via a purge train, discarding those who are believed to have been in proximity of Pulse Lassie. Our cast that happens to be on this train at the start of the game all end up there for different reasons and have different motivations, but I'll leave that to the game and its chapter and story progression, as this is my personal love letter to the game, not a one-to-one retelling of the story. And so this is our first proper introduction to the world. Psycom being the military force for the Sanctum, Team Nora, a ragtag opposition that are allies to our cast in the main story, Lightning and Saz with their own motivations, as well as Snow, Hope, and Vanille. And then finally, the tidbit of information that we get about Lassie and the threat that they pose to the people of Cocoon. But we'll learn a bit more about them later on. Before we go forwards, I think it's wise that we go backwards a bit to understand the bumps in the road that the development of Final Fantasy XIII had, as some of these events would lead to the mixed reception that the game would so famously receive for many years to come post-release.
Come on, come on!
You see, Final Fantasy XIII wasn't always being developed for the PlayStation 3. Initially, the game was being developed for the PlayStation 2, and would begin concepting as early as 2004. Early versions of the game looked very different to the one we would eventually come to know, as it first took shape as a cel-shaded styled game, using some assets from Final Fantasy X Part 2. Production of the game came to a slow in 2005, for roughly 6 months, as the team working on the next title in the series were put on a project to make a technical demo of Final Fantasy VII to showcase the power of the upcoming 7th generation, and what the future could potentially look like. Despite only being a tech demo, the final result of this project turned out to be quite a marvel, further growing Square's reputation for always pushing the graphical and cinematic boundaries in the industry. And although we have 2 of 3 parts of the Final Fantasy VII remakes today, this was just a small taste at the time of where we could have been during the PS3's era. After receiving positive reception of the technical demo from the public, the decision was clear to Square Enix that their next title should be developed for the PS3 instead. This decision would cost the production team approximately another year and a half of work, as they had to make new tools to create their next game for the upcoming HD generation of gaming. This toolkit would later be known as Crystal Tools. Square created the Crystal Tools because they, as well as many of the developers who found the PS3 hard to code for, wanted to lessen their difficult workload. By 2006, Final Fantasy XIII was finally revealed to the public at E3, but the struggles and creative clashes during development would continue right up until the game's release in late 2009. There's more story to the development of 13, and I recommend you watch the Night Sky Princess video on it. I'll leave a link in the description. After 5 years of development, the world was finally introduced to the Crystal Age of Final Fantasy, known as the Fabula Nova Crystallis, a series of games that would surround the same type of crystal mythos. While the original plans for Final Fantasy Versus 13 and Final Fantasy Agito never really came to fruition, in the line of many games in this series, 13 would be the first step into this era of the franchise. With a lot of the essential facts and history of 13's story and pre-release out of the way, it's a fitting time for me to insert myself and the love I have for 13 into this video. I initially didn't get to play 13 right away. Having an older brother who had the say on what we played on the Xbox, I never really got to have my hands on any of the games I would admire from afar through trailers and YouTube Let's Plays. I still to this day remember the trailer that featured singer Leona Lewis running around Grand Pulse while her song for the game, titled My Hands, played alongside the gameplay. You would often find ads for 13 in the West playing this song, even fan-made AMVs. All of these videos are still up to date and fill me with so much nostalgia, with each watch of these promotional pieces expanding my enjoyment for this track. I'll also leave links to those below. This period, however, didn't last, as the day finally came when I got my own Xbox 360 for Christmas in 2012, not long after my older brother moved away from home. This is when my journey properly began. I see this point in my life as the moment where I, like every other teenager in the world, would begin to find themselves and what they like, no longer bound by the things that surround them. My music tastes were different, I dressed differently, football was no longer the sport I took interest in, I wanted to skate. Finally, I had the freedom of choice to step foot into worlds I had so desperately wanted to discover for myself. Freedom from the shackles of tastes that weren't my own, such as FIFA and Call of Duty games. Games that would fulfill the typical UK lad's desires, but not mine. I needed to see worlds beyond, touching down on Halo rings, running around vast lands on chocobos, and seeing some of the greatest universes painted before my eyes. This narrative gets off track a little and leaks into my past and personal life, but I feel like it's essential to know the person behind the video to even remotely care about why I love this not so loved game. I don't think it's all that interesting to just be a voice expressing my opinions. So here I am, looking like Wish.com says, but that's not the point. The point is that I just want to be a bit more personal with this video and a bit more direct and really expressing why I love 13, because over the years I've never been able to just put a finger on why I love it more than the others and why it holds such a special place for me, but this video is just one massive attempt at that. So if you go on to like the video, drop it a like, drop it a sub, you know, leave a comment on like why you may or may not like 13. Just, you know, it's not a perfect game, and this video isn't that. So we'll get into that. Anyway, back to the video and voiceover. I mean this quite sincerely when I say that I landed in quite an awkward spot when it comes to timing and the games that were coming out. Halo 4 was the new kid on the block, but ended up being just as, if not even more disliked than Final Fantasy XIII was. Yet, I came to love it as it gave me some of the best memories and introduced me to some lifelong friends. I had to take a short second out of this Final Fantasy XIII video. Wait, hold on. I had to take a short second out of this video to talk about how important Halo 4 was to me. Sure, it's not the best game in the series, and 343 have only gone on to mishandle the franchise for more than a decade now. But I couldn't imagine how my life would have been without it. Halo 4 was what initially got me into making YouTube videos because, surprise surprise, this isn't my first ever YouTube video. Anyway, during 2013, some of the things that I love were still new at the time. Halo 4 was a few months in, Final Fantasy XIII 2 was the same way, and The Legend of Korra would begin broadcasting. There's a running theme with these three pieces of media. Can you guess what it is? Everybody fucking hates them. Except this guy, who gave 13 a positive steam. You know what? Never mind. Look, I've never understood why, but some of the media that I've often loved have also been things that are widely disliked. But then on the other hand, things that are popular and well received in the public eye are things that I never cared for, like Marvel movies. One could go as far as to say that I only have bad takes, although saying that this game doesn't still hold up today, now that's a bad take. So let's dissect this game's universe a little bit. With 13 being the first title in the franchise to be released during the HD era of gaming, it's evident that Square Enix pulled out all the stops to showcase that, not just graphically, but with its art style also. Sure, we can kick and scream about linearity until the cows come home, and we'll cover that, but I don't believe that one of the things that this game can be criticised for is for how it looks. I mean, just look at it. From Lake Brescia to Solar Springs, Erba to Yasha Masif, there's hardly a moment where you're not met with sweeping landscapes, desolate monuments, or populated cities, each one having scores that either put a little spring in the area's step, like the Sunlit Waterscape, or mourn the barren town of Erba with a somber soul song in Dust to Dust. I could go on forever about scoring the areas, and I will in another chapter, but for now, let's focus on the setting. While not every area is fun to be in or even look at, this game does come packed with quite a solid variety of areas. I would finish that sentence with to explore, but there is none. And yet again, I have to say, we'll get to that later on, but for now, I want to at least admire how pretty these hallways can be. I believe that one of the most key things about making the player, the listener, whatever they may be, care about the universe that you're trying to build is making it believable. Aiming for fantasy while making it feel grounded is tricky, but I think it succeeds here. I've been playing this game for 12 years now, with anywhere from 5 to 6 full playthroughs, and I don't think I'll ever get sick of the view that Lake Brescia offers, or the desolate and almost sad feel of the remains of Erba. Lord knows I'd never look forward to the Vile Peaks though. That place is a literal dump and a slugfest with filler story beats, but is outshone by the much nicer settings like the Sunlit Waterscape, Tajin's Tower, and Palampolum. Overall, while it is nice to navigate through this game's universe, there is one thing that's more important than a nice looking city or beautiful nature to take in, and that's the characters living in it. The people make the place, and without it, there isn't much to uphold. So the question is, how do the characters live up to the universe they're placed in? I think it's a shame that our cast of characters don't set the best first impression, and in all honesty, it takes quite a while for them to grow on you and come into their own. I think the one character who sets this example the most is Hope. His story starts off with him grieving his mother, and for most of the game, he plans to enact revenge on Snow for his inability to save her. I strongly believe that this story arc gets drawn out for way too long, and you end up finding his whimpers, tears, and plans of revenge pretty corny, always waiting for him to do something, but knowing he never will. Most of these characters come with their faults, but I think above all, that's what humanizes them. Nothing about the story is supposed to be perfect, and these characters are a representation of that. Vanille is often stooped in willful ignorance and a desire to wait for things to magically blow over. Lightning lacks the ability to empathize with others and at times comes off as really narrow-minded. And Fang would genocide everybody for a pack of Haribos. I don't want to make it seem like these characters or this game being imperfect is a cheap cop-out to criticism, because boy do I have a lot of it for this game. But all of these things have to be approached with a certain mindset as to why they are the way they are. Yes, Hope is a bit whiny and meek when we first meet him, but he's just a kid drowning in the reality of his life being turned upside down almost overnight and going through the very real stages of grief. I strongly feel that there are moments in the game's cutscenes where the voice acting doesn't hit as strongly as it should. But later down the line, we really get to see Hope come into his own and start to sound and act more mature, having slowly learned to accept his situation and begin working on how he can fight against his supposed fate.
It's easy to sit back and let people trick you, like how the Sanctum had us all thinking that a Lassie was some sort of monster. I'm done with their lies. Fal'Cie, this whole focus thing. From here on out, I use my eyes, think, and act. I might not make all the right choices, but as long as I'm the one who decided what to do, there's nothing to regret.
Okay.
It's easy for me to put my hands up and say that Lightning is my favorite character. Seeing someone go from battle-hardened and cold, hiding behind an identity and combat as a resolve to everything, to someone a lot more empathetic and loving to those around her, slowly dropping the guard that she's built up. While I was never as head-on or combat-ready as a character like Lightning in real life, I really resonate with the growth of being a cold and selfish person to being one who's a lot warmer and understanding of those around them. But the real spotlight has to go to Hope here, because I feel as if we, the players, are thrown into immediate turmoil alongside him and really have to adapt to the changes and face things head on. This isn't the Final Fantasy of the past, this was one for the future, and with 13, every new step was a question with answers we didn't quite have yet. Like Hope, we didn't quite know what the next thing in front of us was going to be like. Not all of it was going to be pretty, but there are always silver linings and good things to take away from the bad. There is one more character who deserves to share that spotlight too, but for quite different reasons, and that's Sazh. I'm not sure where to start with Sazh, as he has a lot more depth and emotion to his character than he initially gives off. From the get-go, he's the token character who's always saying the funny things, and while that's not an inherently bad thing, he starts out as the character to ease the tensions and get a laugh out of the player. But I would go as far as to say that his story is much sadder than Hope's. I think this is because Sazh initially hides this well, not talking about his motives, about his son, or even himself. He's just the old man of the group who solely puts his focus on keeping kids safe, whilst occasionally expressing his distastes for the Sanctum and the lies that they spread with fear-mongering news across the populace of Cocoon. While I don't want to give away too many spoilers, I believe that Saz's own personal journey in this story is probably the saddest, and he has to be pulled out of darker places compared to the rest of the group. Of course, there are more characters I could talk about, but I would be here forever, and just like the rest of this video, I want there to be many parts of this game that you discover for yourself should you ever play Final Fantasy XIII if you haven't already. Alas, there is something I can finally talk about without having to worry about spoilers, and that's the music. Get your popcorn. This is going to be a long one. If you haven't noticed by now, each one of these chapters sectioning out this video have all been track titles, somewhat relating to the topic at hand, and each song that plays alongside this video have all been given highlight. The love I have for this soundtrack is indescribable, and I know I would catch a lot of flack in saying that I strongly believe that FF13 soundtrack as the first game standalone and the FF13 series as a whole are easily my favourite soundtracks in the entire franchise, and it's not even close. Not 7, not 15, not even 16 come close for me. With a tinge of honesty though, I am yet to play the FF10 games and many other titles, so I haven't heard all of the soundtracks, but out of the games that I have played, this one just clears for me. One thing that has always been key to me with shows, movies and games has been the soundtracks. For me, it being serviceable isn't merely enough. It has to be memorable and really sell the moment. I think scores can really make or break a medium when it comes to those defining moments, so it's important for not just immersing people in the world you're building, but also making it tangible and memorable. A good example of this is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I know for a fact that without even playing a sound clip, mostly because of potential copyright, that you already hear the soundscapes and the songs in your head should you have seen that movie series. And if you haven't, what have you been doing for the past 20 years or so? Like everyone else, I can only really speak from my own personal experiences, but I truly believe that this is executed brilliantly here. Not just with 1 or 2 scores, but with almost half of the catalogue. Even just the scores I'm using for this video are a small sample size, not even including the other 2 games in the series, because I strictly want to focus on 13 here. It's to absolutely nobody's surprise that I have the game's soundtrack on vinyl, but with 85 tracks in total, only a handful of those were selected for a vinyl release, and I have to be honest in saying it's pretty hit or miss, but highlights like Dust to Dust, Blinded by Light, and Chocobos of Pulse are on there. I want to give you a minute to just appreciate what this game's OST has to offer.
If we believe our souls hanging for the light.
If it wasn't evident so far, you'll often find me preferring more emotional and melodic tracks over most battle themes. For me, this has been a tale as old as time for the Halo games, movies like Your Name, Weathering With You, or one of my other favourite game OSTs in the Ori games, which I had the privilege of seeing in person a couple of years ago, and it was mesmerising, life-changing even. If you have a passion for a game, movie, or show soundtracks, whatever the medium may be, seeing a live orchestra for the series you love is a must-do for everyone. If I was a multi-millionaire, one of the first things I would do is hire out an orchestra to play my favourite scores from 13 for around 2 hours with a mid-break. But by now, the game is old enough to the point where you might be lucky if the final symphony plays a couple of tracks from 13 at best. Anyway, getting back on topic of the game itself, I think the vast majority of the areas that we get to step foot in have been scored beautifully. I know I've harped on about it enough already, but Erba is one of those highlights. Hell, even the less enjoyable areas at least have fitting tracks playing alongside them too. Cocoon, Grand Pulse, no matter what side I'm on, I find myself being immersed into these worlds deeply, always humming along to the song at hand. But I think that's a result of having over 350 hours of playtime in this game, not including the playtime I may have had when I initially owned the game back on Xbox 360. I have to ask, do y'all mind if I praise Jesus real quick?
Chuck, it's Marvin! Your cousin, Marvin Barry? You know that new sound you looking for? Well, listen to this!
Guess you guys aren't ready for that yet. But you kids are gonna love it.
And with that, I rest my case. FF13's soundtrack is the best. And if you disagree, having discussed some of the game's highest highs, it is key that we talk about its lowest lows. When you ask someone why they don't like 13, most people are going to tell you because it's too linear. And the thing is, they're not entirely wrong. But it's not strictly linearity that makes this game a hallway simulator. It's linearity without respite. There are many single player games out there before the age of open world titles came about that are also linear. While I've never played Final Fantasy X, people often have told me how linear that is too, but it's celebrated and widely loved. So what's the difference? Well, when it comes to 13, all you're doing is walking forward, and forward, and forward, and forward, and forward. For like 11 chapters straight. No side quests, no minigames, not a slither of exploration until we get to Grand Pulse late into the game. But even then, it doesn't feel like the most polished or satisfying place to side quest and explore, with the vast majority of it just being grassland filled with wildlife, or as I mentioned earlier, Big Australia.
This big
I understand that in the direction of the narrative, we're short on time and on the run, never safe enough to cozy up in a nice bed and kick about in a saloon and play some silly card games, but this sacrifice just leads to you only ever going forward. It's not just the areas that are hallways, it's the entire game really. There isn't much fun outside of the new style of combat that this game went for, but even that after a while gets really boring and you find yourself running past enemies because that's all this game has to offer. Fighting on top of fighting, on top of fighting, on top of fighting. I can't lie in saying in most of my playthroughs, I hit a wall where I start running past most of the enemies to avoid combat. I would now like to demonstrate the art of being bored in Final Fantasy XIII.
Sorry, boss. Bro, back us up. All right, let's shake things up a little.
I really don't blame people for not liking FF13. It's not for everyone, and most people couldn't stick it out through how monotonous the game cycle becomes. Sometimes, even with all the music, character growth, and nice art direction, isn't enough to keep someone interested. If it's not fun, why bother? As mentioned earlier, this game doesn't give you the best first impression of these characters. Snow is corny, Hope is whiny, Lightning is stubborn, and Vanille is...
Well?
Saying that this game is a hard sell is an understatement. And I know that even this video will never get some people to ever pick this game up. And I think that's a damn shame, because I think the centerpiece of this game is what fails it the most. And that's enough to make all of the good about it seem completely irrelevant. What difference will it make when the gameplay can't uphold everything else that's good about FF13? I choose to die on the hill of the good parts of the game, but not without explaining why. The hardest question to answer is, how can you love a game that's so strictly linear and one-dimensional? And without going in cycles, I really do believe that this is my exception. There aren't many games I can name that I both really love and vouch for, but also recognise as something that is honestly really hard to get into at first, especially if you've never played a Final Fantasy game before. This honestly shouldn't be your first Final Fantasy game. I'm not sure which FF title should take that spot, but I'm more than certain the internet could direct you in the right place, as I'm not the most well-versed Final Fantasy player. A question I must beg is, why do we love anything really? In this case, I think a lot of it is due to timing, as I somewhat mentioned briefly earlier on. Is it the games that we love, or the time period of when we played them? And am I only ever looking at this game through the views of rose-tinted glasses? Personally, I would say no, as I've played 13 through many stages of my life, and over time have only come to not just love it more, but understand it with a perspective of maturity. The stories got sadder, the songs stuck harder, and felt more bittersweet. I aged enough to be able to appreciate this game way more than I could than when I was 14. I believe that the tides have slowly been turning on the view of 13 though, as I start to see more and more people praise the game as time goes on. But I feel as if the era of live service games and a rapidly changing industry has made people go back and appreciate the things that they didn't at the time. I've seen it with shows too. Seasons of Doctor Who they hated at the time, but now love all of a sudden. It's a phenomenon I don't quite understand yet. I don't exactly hate this trend either, as it's brought in a lot of people to retry a lot of media that I love and give them a second chance. With titles like Korra, Halo 4, FF13, and even Doctor Who, I take pride in saying I've always stuck by them, not without acknowledging their faults of course, but always being in their corner and seeing beyond all of the online negativity. At the end of the day, what you enjoy is what you enjoy, and nobody should ever sway you from that. For me to say FF13 has the best soundtrack, nobody should try and take that from me, in the same way I wouldn't deny you of what you love and what things are special to you. When approached with another's opinion, I think it's tiresome to rag on what other people like just because you don't. You may think of their tastes as less than good, that yours are superior, but you never know what these games mean to people. Yeah, Halo 5 might be a bad game, but it may be the last Halo game somebody got to play with a family member before they passed. And I think nobody should ever be robbed of what games or anything else means to them exclusively. For me, this was my Final Fantasy. This is the one I saw through trailers with gleaming eyes, the one that I got to play for myself, by myself, without recommendation or input. I'd played a bit of Final Fantasy through Dissidia on the PSP and Crisis Core as well, but 13 is what really got me hooked on the franchise. It's far from the best game, and I know that now, having played more of the titles, but it's the one that means the most to me. I really think that 13, while shaky, set the foundation for the good steps that this franchise would eventually take. Let me explain how. While 13 isn't the best start, I think it only gets better from here, and a lot of lessons end up being learned. Sure, there are things that shouldn't have been unlearned, like why does the combat end when the character in charge dies? Why don't and why can't I switch to another party member? That eventually gets changed going into 13 too. That game also addresses how linear 13 is by making it a lot more explorable, but admittedly, I've never finished 13 too. I don't know why I've never played it to completion, especially considering I've finished Lightning Returns, but never the middle child of the series. For parts of this I can only speak through the praise that other people have given 13 to, but quite a few people end up preferring 13 to over 13, and then most haven't touched Lightning Returns. While I do sometimes think that this series didn't need a trilogy, and the first game works standalone, it almost feels as if Square wanted to right their wrongs and do it better. I can only speak on behalf of Lightning Returns and a handful of future FF titles like 15 and 16, but I think without 13, those games wouldn't be what they are. Bit by bit, the combat slowly evolved. I really enjoyed Lightning Returns' combat style. Stepping away from a party system and making role changes on the fly felt really dynamic and fluid. It's been a while since I played that game, so my memory is a bit rusty on it, but I am of the opinion that the combat got better with each game in the series, and then further on down the line with games like FF16. Neither of those games are considered to be one of the greats either, but they definitely improved on what had come before it, even if they took a few steps back in the process with stuff like quick time events in 13.2, or the global timer that Lightning Returns gives you, which makes you feel like you're in a rush, which isn't the best feeling when you're playing a game, but I can't say I've ever ran out of time either in any of my handful of playthroughs. Overall, while most people might not see it, I really think that 13 benefited the franchise along the line, because there are always silver linings and things to learn. To me, the best example of that is FF16. You'll have to excuse my goldfish brain as games don't stick much in my mind after only one playthrough, but I know I enjoyed it a lot more than 13. Of course, it'll never quite have the love I give to 13, but I can admit it's a much better game and something I'd call a fully realised version of 13 if it was made today. And so I ask, where do we go next? And is there a new future for this game? For a few years now, if you've kept a close enough ear to the ground, there's been whisperings about the desire for a remaster of the FF13 trilogy. For this, I'm pretty neutral because part of me feels like this series doesn't need a remaster. It still holds up pretty well and can even be worked around with mods on PC to fix a few visual things and make the game more convenient. But on the other hand, I would love to see how the game could look now that it's been almost 15 years, at least with the first game. If a remaster were to be made, be it just for the first game or all three of them, I'd hope that outside of graphical upgrades, there could be things that are additive to the games, like adding a bit more optional stuff in FF13 like points of respite and fun, maybe a side quest here and there, add minigames to the Nautilus area. If we go into the territory of ripping things out and replacing them with new things, like whole areas, then it becomes more of a remake, which I really don't think we need. To quote one of my favourite creators here in Hidden Xperia on the topic of remasters and remakes, additive and expansive, not alternative. While I may not be gasping for a remaster for this trilogy, if one was to be made, I think my desire for more people to give this game a shot would be helped in this case. I think this series deserves a second try, and if a remaster trilogy would sell that and improve upon what's already there, then I'd be happy, disregard how pretty it could look. I think it already does, even today, more than a decade later. Another benefit is that it would also make the games more accessible outside of the PC, as the series isn't even available on the PS4 or PS5. I believe it's playable on Xbox One and Series X and S through backwards compatibility, but each version doesn't go without their faults. If you want to know which version is best to play, should a remaster never happen, then I recommend you watch Austin SV's video on it. Link will be in the description, as always. Now that we're creeping close to the end of this video, one of the final things to ask is it worth playing? And I wish I could give a direct answer, but it's not that black and white. Naturally, I love this game and this series, even if I haven't finished 13.2, and I would always recommend someone play it, maybe not as their first FF game, but one you give a second chance, or maybe give a chance to begin with if you've been swayed by harsh criticism. Parts of me wants to say wait for a remaster, but that may never come. Another recommendation would be to play it with mods, and while it's something I've never personally done, I know there are a lot of good fixes and adjustments out there for the game that would smoothen the experience of playing it in its original form, at least on PC. While the game isn't broken by any means, a few lighting issues, cutscene resolution upscaling, and improved textures are all out there. They are by no means necessary either. If you're on console, then you're kind of out of luck on these things, but like I say, I've never modded fixes or improvements into the game in all my 12 years. No matter what though, some people will just never play this game, and that's perfectly fine. I've accepted that for a long time. Sometimes you're in the minority of something that is your taste, and the thing you so dearly love is a hard sell. This video isn't strictly that, it's mostly a love letter, but also with bouts of criticism, self-awareness, and acceptance at this game being an imperfectly executed attempt as a mainline game. My hopes for this video is at the very least I can shine some light on the game that tripped up a little bit, but I was still proud of it for finishing the race. Sure, it didn't come first in this 100-meter sprint to be the best, but it doesn't make it any less special to me because it's the Final Fantasy that meant the most to me for a very long time. I'd love nothing more than to sound off with you guys in the comments about this game, your experiences with it both in and out of the game itself, what it got you into, who it reminds you of, and all sorts of other things. What's important is stories, and this has been mine. And more than anything else, I'd love to hear yours too. 13 is deserving of love as well, and even after all of this, I can't do it justice. And so, I have sung my swan song. My first effort on this channel is also a wave goodbye to a game I love dearly. Even if this video isn't enough to describe how this game has shaped me, no matter how much I talk about it, it's always going to be a feeling that spoken word could never truly realize. But if I'm forced to put it simply, it's just a lot of love. You may ask why this is a goodbye. Surely I can go back in a few years' time and do it all over again, and I very may well do so, but life is always fleeting and sometimes you do have to let go of the things you love. Final Fantasy XIII was important to my formative years, and still somewhat is, even as I edge closer to my 30s, so I'll forever be thankful for that. But life must go on, and there are greener pastures out there, new loves to discover. To quote Matt Smith playing the 12th Doctor in Doctor Who during his regeneration scene, he says,
"When you think about it, we are all different people all through our lives. And that's okay, that's good, you gotta keep moving so long as you remember all the people that you used to be." I will not forget one line of this. Not one day. I swear.
I've loved this game for 12 long years, and through hundreds and hundreds of hours of play, and one massively heartfelt video, I can finally say to FF13, I let you go.
You survive.
I also believe that if we stuck together, somehow we could change our fate.